every single freaking day since 1992. We do fight every day for our clients, and that's who I want to talk about for a moment. Despite the rhetoric that gets used routinely about asylum seekers to this country, I happen to believe, and we happen to believe at the Human Rights Initiative, that our country is better off and fortunate because people made the difficult decision to leave their homes and families behind and come here and seek refuge in this country. They enrich us. They do not endanger us. These are people like the young mother from Egypt who makes the courageous decision to come here to protect her daughter from the brutal practice of female genital mutilation. Or the human rights activist from Ethiopia who stands up against torture and prison repeatedly in order to stand up against oppression. Or the transgender woman from El Salvador who experiences years and years of violence in her life simply by trying to live her authentic self. Or the young teenage girl from Honduras who comes up here to seek refuge from the sexual assault that she's threatened with by the ultra-violent street gangs. Our lawyers, our pro bono lawyers, our volunteer psychologists, our volunteer translators work every single day to protect people like that because we believe our country is better off because of them. I'm very fond of saying that I've been doing this work since right before the War of 1812. It's always been hard work. But it's never been harder than now because of the systematic attacks on those rights that my brother Pablo mentioned. There are 60,000 vulnerable asylum seekers forced to wait in Mexico in perilous conditions. And there are at least 600, according to Human Rights First, a report that was just issued this week, there are 636 public reports of rape, kidnapping, torture, and other violence attacks against those asylum seekers that are forced to wait in Mexico to their case. With regard to the conditions in Mexico, Helen Perry, a nurse practitioner, says this, speaking from having seen other humanitarian crises in the world, this is one of the worst situations I've seen, and it's going to get worse, and it's going to get worse rapidly. And in addition to all of the things that Paul just gave a short list of the things that are happening towards asylum seekers. There's actually a very long list, which I'm going to take the time to do today. But I will say that things like having secret courts, think about that, secretive tent courts on the border which are not accessible by witnesses with limited access to lawyers. That's the kind of thing that the countries do, that people flee to come here to the United States because they believe that we're better than that. But right now, guess what? We're not better than that. And all of these things are being done in your name and in my name. And I have a question for you. Is that okay with you?
No.
Yeah, it's not okay with any of us. Make no mistake. These policies exist because they are being written by white nationalists, men like Stephen Miller, that are dedicated to making America white again. And we reject that sound as a community. But here's the thing, I commit to you that my organization, our organization, Human Rights Initiative, and the hermanos and hermanas at Raíces and Catholic Charities and the legal aid organizations of this city, we are going to fight this with every ounce of our strength. A friend once told me, actually within the last 15 months, he said, these are historic times. These are times that define us.
Right.
And in fact, they are. We're going to look back and we're going to have to answer the questions of our children. Were we anti-racists who were fighting against the oppression of our brown brothers and sisters, our black brothers and sisters? Or are we complicit and silenced to the betrayal of the things that make our country great? Just this week, Leonard Pitts wrote in the Miami Herald, "The evil in word is apropos, being done in our name at the border depends for its success on our willingness to watch in compliant silence as fellow human beings are othered and monstered and stripped of their individuality, remade in the image of American fears. And I'll ask you again, is that okay with you? No. Yeah, it's not. And so I think it requires a corporate response. And I think it should be interactive. So I'm going to ask you a question, which is, what are we going to do? And I'm going to ask you to respond with, we are going to stand up and fight. So what are we going to do?
Stand up and fight.
What are we going to do?
Stand up and fight.
I'm going to trust you with that. I'm going to leave you with this quote from Michael Higgins, a human rights activist from Ireland. He says, to look at the bodies on an abandoned rubbish tip, to write details of torture, are experiences that can never be obliterated. To risk a gaze at such wounds of humanity is to choose to be changed forever. To choose to know is to risk being presented with a dilemma. And that dilemma, put simply, is that once one knows, you can from that moment live only in the bad faith of guilty silence or act. Thank you.